The recent decision by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to claw back $500 million worth of federal vaccine research funding is already having local impacts. Here to discuss it is Dr. Michael Koren, cardiologist and chief executive officer at the Jacksonville Center for Clinical Research. Good morning, Dr. Koren.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
It is nice to have you back. So it's kind of interesting that our two lead stories have to do with the official policies and sort of personal preferences of the new HHS secretary, RFK, and both are sort of having their impacts on the First Coast. I want to ask you, though, about this decision to claw back funding for mRNA research. First of all, just how surprising was this announcement?
It was a total shock. So just for everybody's knowledge, last Wednesday, we got an order from the company that we're working with on a major vaccine study, which is not an mRNA study, by the way. And I'll get to those details in a second. And we were told to stop work on this project, even though we're halfway through the project and we had dozens of people scheduled to be part of the project.
We should probably talk a little bit about the work that your company does, the research.
Sure.
You are a medical research company.
Correct.
You bring people in human trials.
We run clinical trials, yes. We are a group of physicians who run clinical trials in multiple specialties. And we have wonderful volunteers. We've worked with thousands of people here in Northeast Florida on multiple different studies. And some of them are medication studies, some of them are vaccine studies, some of them are what we call biomarker studies for a new lab test, some of them are technology studies. But basically, we're the group that people go to when they want to prove whether or not something works.
Okay. And so you are not necessarily funded directly by the federal government, but you are in some ways researching for companies that may be getting some funding from the federal government.
It's a mixed bag. The majority of our funding comes from private sources, but some either comes directly or indirectly through the government. So, for example, when we were involved in the COVID-19 vaccine studies, we worked with a number of companies that are working on that. Pfizer, working with BioNTech, was all privately funded. Moderna was actually funded through Project Warp Speed, which was government funded.
Okay. And so this announcement, when it came down, did you realize immediately that that the announcement from the HHS secretary was going to impact the work that you do?
Well, I didn't even hear about the proclamation from HHS until after we got the work order. So, or I should say, stop work order.
Yeah.
And so we get a stop work order, and this is right in the middle of your major meeting to make sure that everything is going well in the company. And so, what's going on here? And it was really, really odd. And then we did a little research, and we found this news release from HHS saying that they were going to stop funding of mRNA research. And I'm scratching my head, and I said, well, this is not mRNA research. This is a different type of vaccine. And then I read this article from HHS, the news release, and it says that they want to focus on next generation technologies to protect people against COVID and other viral illnesses such as influenza. And I'm saying, well, that's what we're doing. Why would you stop this study that's doing exactly what you say that you want to do? So it's a real disconnect.
And so the announcement is covering mRNA vaccines, and the difference is that your specific clinical trial had to do with something that would be the next generation beyond mRNA vaccines.
Correct.
It would be sort of finding a different way to approach
Exactly,
that
to
immunity.
protect people against COVID. And the irony of this is that there's two ironies of it, actually. Number one is that this was actually being funded through something called BARDA, which is actually part of the Defense Department. And it's a group that was actually started by George Bush Jr. when there was all this concern about bioterrorism. So this was actually funded because they wanted better vaccine platforms to protect our troops and others against bioterrorism attacks. That's number one irony, is that it's actually having a defense purpose. But the other crazy thing, again, is that this was specifically to get beyond mRNA. And we were actually promoting it, saying that this is a non-mRNA way of protecting yourself against COVID.
So just big picture, the idea that the federal government is sort of ending research dollars into a certain area of science that the current secretary of HHS has said he's expressed skepticism over, generally speaking, vaccines.
Yes.
And so can you just sort of characterize what it means for the world of clinical research or science writ large when the government pulls back wholesale from this kind of research?
Well, it's great uncertainty, and there's no internal consistency. So you completely lose confidence, and the government loses its credibility. They're not saying that they're against vaccines, by the way. If you actually read what they say they're against the mRNA technology and they don't want to fund that. They actually say they want to fund other vaccines, but then they don't do it. So it makes you wonder, are they credible at all? Do they really know what's going on? Do they really understand the difference between different vaccines? Do they understand the science of protecting people against viral illnesses? It makes you wonder if they really truly understand all that.
And so, in undermining this area of research, do you think it impacts overall faith in vaccines?
Of course. Yeah, it certainly does, which is unfortunate because vaccines are an incredibly important strategy to protect our citizens. And again, this is not to say that there aren't reasons to question what happened with the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. I can get into some details. In fact, we've done that before. But just remind people is that COVID-19 was a devastating illness, particularly in the beginning, against vulnerable people. Younger, healthier people tended to have a relatively mild illness. The flip side of that is that the vaccines had more of a side effect profile in the younger people and actually a relatively benign side effect profile in older people. So a reasonable strategy would have been to just say, okay, older, more vulnerable people get the vaccine, younger, healthier people probably don't need it. But instead, what happened is that everybody's either for the vaccine or against it, not putting into the context of who the people are we're trying to protect.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with clinical researcher Dr. Michael Koren about the impact of canceled federal funding for ongoing clinical trials. If you have a question or comment, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. So right now there are, I think my understanding is there's 3 FDA-approved mRNA vaccines. There's 2 for COVID and 1 for RSV, which is a
Respiratory syncytial virus, yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
And so I guess the promise of these vaccines is that they can be made quickly.
This is Nobel Prize winning technology. These are products that have been shown to be safe and effective in studies of tens and tens and tens of thousands of people. We have had thousands, say 2,000 people that have been exposed to these vaccines here in Florida within my company. So I have very good firsthand knowledge that these are incredibly well-tolerated products. Yet, for whatever reason, there's this vendetta against this particular idea. To your point, the beauty of a messenger RNA vaccine is that it can be made very quickly, and it doesn't require killing viruses or doing things to inactivate viruses, which is a long process, which also introduces a lot of impurities. So mRNA is really elegant because you basically take the little gene sequence that caused the problem, you make a relatively small molecule that elicits an immune response, like the spike protein, and then boom, you can do this within weeks rather than years. And so with that in mind, and the fact that these are really pure substances, theoretically, it should be a fabulous technology. Now, having said that, when you elicit immune response, there's always going to be a little bit of uncertainty. And for example, one of the things that came up was that younger people who got the COVID-19 vaccine were more likely to get inflammatory conditions such as pericarditis. But they were self-limited, and that's part of the learning of all these things. So maybe younger people who have a more intense immune response get a lower dose. And that's how we learn it in medicine. But instead, the response has been to just sort of shut down this incredibly important avenue of research.
It has been used in testing now for a variety of things other than respiratory illnesses or things like COVID. I mean, there are people who are using it to research cancer.
Yeah, there's many implications and applications of this technology, some of which we've been involved with. Not all of the work. There have been other areas where we've decided, when we say we, there's the scientific community, has decided that they probably don't work well enough. But the technology itself, again, is Nobel Prize winning. It's very precise. It is actually responsible for 3 products on the market. And by the way, there's only 3 COVID-19 vaccines that are approved in the U.S., and 2 of them are mRNA. The other one being Novavax, which is a small protein that is also given to patients. So it's not a virus that's been inactivated, such as the Johnson & Johnson or the AstraZeneca vaccines, which are not available right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was a more traditional type of vaccine. It wasn't an mRNA, and it ultimately created some serious health impacts, and they stopped manufacturing it.
They stopped manufacturing because it couldn't compete. It didn't work as well.
Yeah, but it didn't also create some blood clotting issues? Or yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, your
Yeah.
memory is excellent. Yes.
And so what does it mean for these areas of research, whether it's autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular diseases, which is your specialty, diabetes, even things like cystic fibrosis, where there was some promise that mRNA vaccines is this research going to continue without
Yeah,
government funding?
a very important question. So it can continue without government funding. So fortunately, some of the companies that are involved in this are well-heeled. They have money for research. As I mentioned, even for the COVID-19, Pfizer, which is a big established company, self-funded all their research, whereas Moderna used government money. So I think it will still move forward, but there are a lot of startup companies that may not be able to participate now without the government help. And there are different ways of using this technology that may not get explored because there's no government funding for more entrepreneurial type of companies that may want to take a little bit different types of risk when understanding health issues compared to the big pharmaceutical houses.
And we do know just from, what history has taught us that pharmaceutical companies tend to pursue things that will make money for
Of
them,
course.
not necessarily tackle the diseases that would be otherwise prioritized if they don't think that there's a
there-
profit in
yeah,
there.
it's a really interesting point that is probably not well understood. Is yes, drug companies are in it to make the money. There's no question about that, and that's fine as long as they provide benefit and they provide safe products. I'm all for that. But the way it actually works, Ann, is that those big companies are always looking at the small companies that are trying new things. And if a small company tries a new thing and it works, then they're going to invest in that company. So there's a lot of investment that goes from the big pharmaceutical companies to these small companies. And that was also a role for government to look at things that were sort of cutting edge and getting it going enough where commercial interests would then get comfortable funding the rest of the research.
And so we know that there has also been a lot of pullback of funding at places that do direct federal research like NIH.
Mhm.
Earlier this year, there was pullback from research that was being done into the bird flu,
Yeah.
and a possible vaccine for that. I know that there have been some people in the world of infectious disease research that have said that this decision is reckless.
It's horrible.
In fact, the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research at the University of Minnesota said on the PBS NewsHour last week, he said it was, quote, unequivocally the most dangerous public health decision I have ever seen made by a government body. Do you think that that's hyperbolic? Do you think that's true?
Well, I haven't studied all the decisions that the government made over the course of time. There may have been worse ones.
We should say this guy served under 7 presidents, so he's looking at it with a little bit
it
of
may
a
be slightly hyperbolic. I don't know. But I will say it's not a good decision in my opinion. And so public health is one thing, but this research funding is also good for business. These are American companies developing American technologies that are protecting the world. Pfizer and Moderna sold incredible numbers of vaccines all around the world. And if you went to places like China or India, they had lots of options, by the way. People don't realize that there was 140 COVID-19 vaccines available around the world that were registered with the WHO. But everybody acknowledged that the mRNAs were the best. So people who can afford it in India or China and other parts of the world would get the mRNA vaccines, thinking that this American technology was the best. And here we are pulling money out from developing these new technologies. So it doesn't, for a business-oriented president, it doesn't make sense to pull this away from the biomedical business.
On what level does it make sense?
Um, it 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 doesn't. I wish I could come up with something. I always like to look at both sides of the of the story, but I think it's purely political. I think it's purely political, and it's feeding into a notion that there's money wasted. Of course, biomedical research is not the most efficient process in the world. We certainly learn. Every experiment doesn't turn out the way we think, and that's how we learn. And we have a great system where we learn without putting the public at harm because we have such great vigilance systems and we have such great ways of evaluating these technologies even before a patient touches them with animals, et cetera. So we have all those things in place, but it's never going to be perfect. It's not the perfectly efficient process. So if you argue that this is protecting against government waste, well, you could probably find an anecdote or two where that might be the case, but the overall picture just doesn't fly together because, in fact, there's so many examples of where just the seed money is resulting in these incredible technologies. And again, MRA is an incredible success story. Operation Warp Speed, which of course, was one of the crowning achievements of the first Trump administration is now not even being discussed by the second Trump administration, which seems so odd to me.
We have an email from Ricardo. He says demonizing vaccine science led to the CDC shooting last week. We have to stop the irresponsible, crazy rhetoric. Of course, there was someone who was shooting at the CDC building. Very scary for the people who've been working in there. I think a lot of the people who work at the CDC feel targeted in other ways,
Sure.
just between broadsides about the research that is being done at the federal level, cutbacks, other things. Um, do you think that this is going to cost lives?
Again, I don't know enough about it, but I will say that people who commit these crimes typically are mentally ill,
Oh,
and they'll find one reason or another to rationalize their mental illness.
I should be clear.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean more the decision to pull back on the vaccine research,
Yes.
like the bird flu, or this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why you can kind of get away with it in the short term is that it's hard to quantify these things because a lot of these technologies will be doing good many years down the road. So getting back to the messenger RNA technology, which I know quite a bit about since I was so involved with the COVID-19 development projects. This was based on government research that was put forth 20 years ago. So it turns out that one of my college classmates named Drew Weissman won the Nobel Prize for this technology. And so I've known him literally since second year biology in college. So that's how I know him. And so he had a government grant to work on messenger RNA actually for HIV purposes. And it turned out that they developed this technology. He connected with a PhD from Hungary named Dr. Kariko, and the two of them together developed this idea that you had to change the base pairs in messenger RNA to make it effective for the vaccines. But they had no idea it was going to help people with COVID. This was developed 20 years before COVID even hit us. So having these technologies available is so unpredictable. And so to answer your question is we don't know when and how this will protect us, but at some point it probably will.
And having that technology advance to the next level could possibly be saving lives.
Exactly.
Um, I want to ask you a little bit because before the show we were just talking about the ethics of running a clinical trial like this. What you have in place in terms of the obligations you have to your patients, what they're told. I'm just curious. First of all, how you feel that this announcement is impinging on that.
Sure.
That
Well,
you
I can
provide.
be very explicit. So in this study that was just put on hold, again, by the way, we're still trying to get it back up and going, but it was put on hold after 5,000 people around the country were already enrolled. And there was another 5,000 that were being recruited. So when we recruit patients for the study, we recruit them months in advance, and we tell them this is what to expect during the study. In this case, we're comparing a technology developed by a company called Vaxart, which presents the COVID-19 antigen to the mucosal lining of the stomach versus the mRNAs. So everybody in this particular study would get some protection against COVID, one versus the other.
And the mRNAs are injected.
Correct.
And the drug that you're testing would
Is
be
oral, it's a pill. That's
Okay.
correct.
And is not mRNA.
That's correct.
Okay.
So their goal was to promote the next generation, and there may be some theoretical advantages for using a oral vaccine, like the oral polio vaccines, for example, is you're presenting the antigen or the protein that elicits the immune response to a mucosal surface rather than to a muscle. And not to get too nerdy here, but there are different antibodies, and some antibodies work at the level of the mucosa and others work in the bloodstream.
Okay.
So there's super interesting science behind this. So again, getting back to the patients, we're telling people, okay, don't get your usual vaccine. We're going to provide that for you. So we got that covered for you. You're going to come in. We have an enrollment period of, say, 2 or 3 months in preparation for the cold and flu season. So now is the time we enroll people so they're protected in October through February. And it's all by design, all by plan. And they said, great. So we get a bunch of people, literally a couple hundred people that have agreed to do this.
That's right here on the First Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we put them into the studies already. I think we've put in a little bit over 100 when we got the hold order. And we had another 100 in the queue. And then we have to say, oh, well, sorry, but this whole plan that we came up with over the last several months is now put on hold. And we don't know if it's going to be overcome by some other government order that comes down the road in a week. Which, by the way, already happened in this study. I mentioned to you off air that in February, as we're getting ready for the study, we got word that the government was going to put it on hold because of Doge. And we figured that this would not happen. Then we get a call in May saying, oh, the study's up and going. BARDA has looked at this. Again, the Defense Department has looked at this and has actually prioritized this study. Again, money is not coming directly from HHS. This is coming from BARDA, from the Defense Department. And so all these agencies in the government are giving us these mixed signals. And at the end of the day, the poor patient that prepared to get protected against COVID in this program has the rug pulled out from under him or her.
And so when it comes to, having someone participate in a study, telling them not to get their traditional COVID vaccine that they might have been planning to get, and then, being in this circumstance, does that kind of fly in the face of just the basic ethics of doing clinical research? I mean,
Absolutely. Basic ethics of
and how
healthcare.
so? I mean, help
Well,
explain that.
again, one of our ethical obligations as a physician, as a healthcare provider, is you lay out a plan for a patient, you get their consent, and then it's expected that you follow through on the plan, unless there's a really, really good reason not to, like a safety reason. But if you then present all this, and again, this was all in cooperation with the government and Vaxart and everybody else, and then boom, literally you get an email, literally 5 minutes before somebody's going to show up to get their vaccine, that's completely unethical. It's just wrong.
What about the perspective? I'm just curious in terms of, they have given their time, they have given their bodies in some ways for this research, and some of it's been done. But if nothing happens and it's sort of all for naught,
That's a great point. And it's a more subtle point that people don't always get, including some healthcare providers. So when these studies are being designed, there are statistical calculations that are done to determine how many patients need to be in the study. So for this particular study, it was 10,000 patients. And that's not a random number. That's based on what we think the possible differences will be between the two elements that we're testing. And if you stop the study at 5,000, the whole study may be for naught because you won't have enough data to prove the point one way or another. So all that effort that was put in by these volunteers, and some people are motivated by just being part of the scientific process, not anything else, that is taken away from all these people because we don't have enough data to actually prove the hypothesis one way or another.
We have an email from Andrew. He says, not sure the surprise about all this. Once anti-vaxxer RFK Jr. endorsed Trump, it was clear where things were going to go. My question, does this mean that flu and COVID vaccines won't be available at all or that they won't be supported by insurance?
Well, it's a good question. Obviously, CMS is part of this whole HHS complex.
CMS.
Yes, the Center for it's basically Medicare and Medicaid,
Okay.
Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services or
Okay.
medical services. And sorry for the jargon, but they're also part of this whole complex, and they could decide that the government's not going to compensate for these vaccines, at which point individuals have to pay for them out of pocket. But the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are FDA approved. They are on the market. People can buy them of course, with a prescription. And so that availability won't be necessarily taken away, but the funding of it could be taken away.
So they could be available, but just be much more expensive because
Correct.
your health insurance doesn't cover them. They're not $10. They could be $120.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the price will be, but it'll probably be somewhere between 10 and 120, yes.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, right at this point, what you're telling your staff,
Mm.
people that may have been hired to handle this research, what you're telling your clinical participants. Are you waiting? Are they on hold? What happens?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a simple answer, but I don't know because the study is still continuing for the 5,000 people, including the 100 plus here in Northeast Florida, but it's stopped for these other people that were in the interim. So, literally, this is a day-to-day adventure in terms of what we can tell people and we can't tell people. I've sought out the advice of the company, and they're also confused. They're still trying to get clarity. Again, this hit them like a ton of bricks. They were just literally sent an email that said, "You're going to stop work," and so they're trying to figure it all out. So the answer is that there's a lot of confusion, but what I will say is that we have an ethical obligation that we will fulfill for anybody that has already been in the study. We will make sure that everything that we said we're going to do, we're going to do, whether or not we get paid for it, because we have an ethical obligation to follow through on what we said. As far as the new people, we are beholden to these companies for actually access to the product, and we will not be able to accommodate them, at least in the short term. But we will continue to work towards getting the study back to where it started.
Are you concerned about staff?
I am, but I have a very strong commitment to our staff, and we'll figure out another project to get them involved with to make sure they're staying productive.
It's
And by
just
the way, and also for the patients, a lot of patients do clinical research because they love the process. It's a very nurturing process. We like to talk about research as a care option because you get a lot of attention, you get a lot of support, you get a lot of knowledge through these projects. And for people that aren't able to get involved in this particular project, we can find another one. Fortunately, we're a robust, deep organization that has probably 40 or 50 ongoing projects right now.
we've got a call from Sally in Springfield. Sally, we're going to wrap shortly, but go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to express my concern and outrage that someone with anti-vaccine beliefs was put in this position and then made this dictate. My opinion is if people don't want to get vaccines, then they should just not get them. But to deprive the rest of us from advancement in science is just wrong. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sally.
I appreciate that.
Well, Dr. Koren, I think we're going to leave it there, but thank you so
Okay.
much for coming in this morning. Good luck with your research. I hope that you're able to
Appreciate
get it
it.
back on track.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.